Ethan Hale's horse suddenly came to a halt, letting out an uneasy whinny. "What is it now?" "You are old but still so sensitive," Ethan muttered. Then his eyes suddenly froze. Up ahead, beneath the branches of a lone old oak standing in the middle of the empty land, a human figure was swaying in the wind. As he got closer, his heart sank. It was a young Apache woman, a deep rope mark wrapped around her neck, her body covered in bruises. Suddenly, the girl shuddered for a brief moment, and that was when he realized she was still breathing barely. "Oh Lord," Ethan whispered, his hands trembling as he pulled out his knife to cut the rope. Her limp body collapsed into his arms. "Can you hear me?" he asked softly, shaking her shoulder. But only the wind replied. Her breathing was so faint, it seemed as though it might vanish at any second. Without hesitation, Ethan took off his coat and wrapped it around her freezing body, then lifted her onto his horse. "Hang in there. This is not where our story ends." As the sun set, the two silhouettes, a lone rancher and a woman left for dead by a noose, slowly disappeared down the dusty red road. The small wooden cabin sat silently in the middle of the arid prairie. Inside, the firelight from the hearth flickered across the darkened walls, casting shadows on the pale face of the woman lying on an old bed. Her breathing was still very weak. Ethan sat beside her, his calloused hands resting on her forehead, feeling the burning heat radiating from her skin. "You have to make it through this fever," he muttered, his voice as if speaking more to himself than to her. For 2 days, he changed the water, laid cold cloths on her forehead, and brewed herbal remedies using plants the Apache had taught him about many years ago. Every time she gasped for air or trembled in a feverish gaze, he sat close, holding her cold hand gently in his. On the 3rd day, her eyes opened, deep, guarded, and alert. She tried to sit up, inching back toward the corner of the bed, as if afraid he might hurt her. "Do not touch me," she said, her voice raspy and broken. Ethan stayed still, raising both hands in front of him. "I am not here to hurt you. You were hanged. I just cut the rope and brought you back here." She stared at him in silence for a long moment, her breath still heavy. "Why?" "Because I could not just stand there and watch," he answered, then slowly turned back toward the fire. In the days that followed, she kept her distance. Every time Ethan stepped closer, she would look down or turn her eyes away. But the trembling had stopped. When he brought her a bowl of warm porridge, she quietly accepted it. When he handed her his coat to keep warm, she gently draped it over her shoulders without saying a word. One night, as the wind howled outside the door, she spoke for the first time. "Do you live here alone?" "Yeah," Ethan replied slowly. "It has been a long time." Silence fell again, but this time it no longer felt heavy. Perhaps even she did not realize that the fear in her heart had begun to crack, little by little. And as for Ethan, he could not quite explain why, but he knew he wanted her to stay. Many days had passed since the day Ethan cut that fateful rope. The fever had broken, the bruises had begun to fade, but the eyes of the Apache woman, now he knew her name was Alina, still held something heavier than death itself. They lived side by side under the same roof. He worked out by the horse stables, while she quietly hung clothes or tended the fire. The first few conversations had started to feel more natural. Occasionally, when Ethan brought in a bowl of hot soup, she gave a slight nod. Sometimes, he would catch her gaze lingering at the doorway, staring off into the distance, as if searching for a buried memory. One afternoon, as the wind howled and the sky took on a copper-red hue, Alina suddenly spoke. "Do you want to know why they hanged me?" Ethan paused from splitting wood and turned around. "If you want to tell me, I will listen." She was silent for a long time before she finally began. "Because they believed. I could not bear children." The words dropped into the room like a stone breaking the surface of a still lake. Ethan said nothing, just looked at her, letting her continue. "In my tribe, a woman who cannot give birth is believed to carry a curse. I tried, I prayed, but the years passed and my womb stayed empty." Her voice trembled, each word cracking under the weight of memory. "He, the one who once swore to protect me, was the first to call me useless. Then they beat me, tied me up, and hanged me like an animal." Ethan stepped forward slowly and gently, as if afraid to wound her further. "No one has the right to do that to you." "But they did," she replied, her eyes locked on the fire. "And many times I thought, maybe I deserve to die." Ethan shook his head, his voice low and rough. "You are still alive. That means God is not finished with your story. Maybe the next chapter will be different." For the first time, Alina looked directly into his eyes. In that moment, inside the lonely cabin, two people, once forsaken by fate, seemed to find one another. No longer a savior and the saved, but two souls stepping out from the shadows of the past. "Thank you," she whispered. Ethan only nodded. He knew from this moment on, the silence between them was no longer a wall, but the quiet ground on which trust was beginning to grow. Since that night, the air inside the cabin had begun to shift. The cautious silence of those early days was gone, replaced by hesitant conversations, glances that lingered longer than necessary, and a quiet sense of empathy beginning to take root from their shared pain. Each morning, Ethan rose early to take the cattle out to the fields, while Alina quietly tidied the house, lit the fire, and prepared breakfast. At first, she did it just to feel less useless, but over time, she realized she wanted to do it because this place had started to feel like a home. One afternoon, as Ethan was repairing the wooden fence damaged by the storm the night before, Alina walked over, carrying a hammer and a few planks. "Let me help. Your arms are still too weak." "Better than sitting around remembering the past," she replied softly. They worked side by side in a comfortable silence. Every time their hands brushed while holding a plank, Alina felt her heart skip a beat. Ethan, on the other hand, would pull his hand away quickly, as if afraid someone might catch him feeling something. That evening, they sat by the fire. Ethan made tea, the same bitter tea he had drunk alone for so many years. Today, he handed her a cup. "This stuff is a bit rough," he said. "So, how long have you been living with this bitterness?" she asked, her lips curling into the first smile since she had woken up. "Quite a while now." From that day on, they began to talk more about little things, the weather, the crops, the cattle, and slowly about deeper things. Ethan spoke of the wife he had lost during childbirth. Alina shared the memory of her first night under the moon as a wife and the beginning of many painful years that followed. One sunset with the wind turning the prairie a glowing gold. Alina stood next to Ethan, watching the sun dip behind the hills. "If you had not passed by that day, do not say that." "No, I need to. If you had not passed by that day, I would never have known that I could still live and still see this light." Ethan did not reply. He only looked at her, and in his eyes was something that words could never say. And she, for the first time in many years, felt her heart begin to open, not because a strong man had saved her, but because a broken soul, just like hers, had touched her wounds with a quiet gentleness. Two people once cast aside, one who had lost his family, the other, abandoned by her own, had now found each other, not through pity, but through something far deeper, a feeling of belonging. I am deeply grateful for your presence here. If this story reminds you of days gone by, dusty evenings, the echo of hooves in your chest, please subscribe to my channel so that each day we can sit together again, and I will share with you another story from the Wild West. The June wind scorched the western plains, carrying with it the searing heat and acrid scent of dry prairie dust. Ethan decided it was time to take Alina into the nearest town to buy salt, medicine, and a few essential supplies. She hesitated, then gave a small nod. "It is time I stopped hiding," she said, her voice quiet but steady. They rode together on a single horse, moving slowly across the sunburnt fields. The small town came into view, a row of weathered wooden buildings, a saloon reeking of whiskey, and a main road caked in dust. As soon as Alina set foot on the ground, every eye turned toward her. Whispers spread like wildfire. "That is her. The woman they hanged heard her own people did it. Still alive. That is a damn miracle." Alina lowered her gaze, but Ethan stepped forward, placing himself between her and the crowd. "We get what we need, then we head home," he said calmly. Inside the general store, an older man with silver hair narrowed his eyes at her. "I would advise you to send her away unless you want trouble." Ethan's fast did not change. Tension spread quickly. A group of 3 rough-bearded men stepped out from the saloon across the street, their hands resting on the grips of their guns. One of them spat near Alina's feet. "Filthy savage. Got some nerve showing up here again." Ethan took one step forward, his eyes cold as steel. "Say that again." The man froze. There was not a soul in town who did not know Ethan Hale, a war-hardened veteran who had survived 2 border campaigns and once took down 3 outlaws with a single Colt. The man backed off, cursing under his breath as he turned away. As they left the store, Alina whispered, "You did not have to do that. I am used to it." "No," Ethan cut in. "No one should ever get used to being treated like they are nothing." On the way back, she sat silently behind him, her hands unconsciously clutching his coat. In her eyes was more than fear. There was a rare, fragile sense of safety. For the first time in her life, someone had stood up for her. Not for honor, not for duty, but simply because she deserved respect. That night, beside the crackling fire, Alina whispered, "I have never seen anyone stand up for me like that." Ethan looked out the window where the wind still howled across the prairie. "Maybe because I know what it feels like when the world turns its back on you." In that moment, the past began to lose its grip, not through violence, but through the quiet strength of someone who stayed. Summer arrived slowly, like the breath of the earth itself on the parched land where the lone wooden cabin stood. Life carried on with its familiar rhythm. Ethan headed to the fields at dawn, while Alina tended the fire, looked after the small vegetable garden, and prepared supper. But something had changed, not just in the way her eyes lingered on the horizon, but within her own body. For several weeks, Alina had felt more tired than usual. Mornings brought intense nausea, and some days she would sit slumped on the wooden steps for hours, unable to stand. Ethan grew concerned. "Are you feeling all right?" he asked one morning, seeing her leaning against the table, her face pale as ash. "I do not know," she murmured. "Maybe it is the weather." But one afternoon, as the sun was beginning to set behind the distant ridge, Alina stepped out from the small room, her hand trembling as it rested over her stomach. Ethan, stacking hay nearby, stopped when he saw the tears welling in her eyes. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice choked, "I think I am pregnant." The words froze him in place. Even the desert wind seemed to pause in that moment. Are you sure?" "It has been more than a month," she said softly, as tears rolled down her cheeks. "I cannot believe it. They hanged me because they thought I was worthless." And now Ethan walked toward her, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "No one is worthless. It is going to be all right." Alina collapsed into his chest, sobbing. But these were not tears of fear. They were the tears of someone who had been condemned by the world, and now, against all odds, had been given back the right to live and the right to be a mother. In the days that followed, the two of them began preparing for what was to come. Ethan built a cradle from oak trees he had cut in the northern woods, while Alina stitched small quilts from old fabric. They talked about names, about the future, about a life that would no longer be just the two of them. One night, as silver moonlight fell over the red earth, Alina gently placed her hand over her growing belly. "I used to think I had already died, but maybe." The moment they hanged me was when fate began writing a new story. Ethan reached out and took her hand, holding it tight. "And I will be here to write the rest with you." That miracle, the one they had both believed would never come, had finally arrived, not as some divine rescue from the sky, but as a quiet reward for two souls who dared to keep living, dared to believe, and dared to love after the cruelest of trials. News spread faster than the wind that the woman who had once been hanged not only survived, but was now carrying a child. And then, on a sweltering afternoon, as Ethan was splitting wood out in the yard, a lone rider appeared on the horizon, a man with a face Alina never thought she would see again. It was Caden, her former husband, the very man who had ordered her tied to a tree and had tightened the rope around her neck when the horse stopped at the gate. Caden leapt down, eyes wild with panic and desperation. "Alina!" he shouted. She stepped out from the porch, one hand resting gently on her growing belly, her face calm as if he had never existed. "I heard, you are carrying my child." He fell to his knees, voice cracking. "Please come back. That blood is mine. The tribe needs an heir. I beg you, come home." Alina stood silent for a long while. Every horrifying memory came rushing back. The cold night when he called her worthless, the mocking laughter of those who once named her a curse, the choking grip of the noose. She took a deep breath and stepped down from the porch. "I died by your hands, Caden," she said, her voice as cold as steel. "This child was not conceived to save your bloodline. This child is here to begin a life that I choose." Caden leaned forward, hand reaching out as if to touch her. "I beg you, if not for me, then for the child." A sharp thud cracked through the air as Ethan grabbed him by the collar, yanked him backward, and slammed him to the ground. "You beat her. You hanged her like an animal, and now you come crawling here to beg." His voice rumbled like thunder. Caden scrambled to his feet, but Ethan landed a punch that sent him sprawling back down, blood dripping from the corner of his mouth. "Get out," Ethan growled, "and do not let me ever see you anywhere near here again." Caden rose, shame and fury burning in his eyes. He cast one last look at Alina before mounting his horse and riding off, leaving behind only the fading echo of hoofbeats and a cloud of red dust. Alina turned to Ethan, eyes shimmering. "Thank you." "Do not thank me," he said quietly. "You saved yourself." In that moment, Alina felt lighter than she had ever known. The past had come knocking, and she had refused to open the door. For the first time in her life, she had chosen herself and the man who had stayed when the whole world walked away. Autumn arrived as gently as a breath after a long storm. The wind from the northern mountains carried the scent of dry grass and fresh earth, slipping through the cracks of the small cabin where warm light glowed from within. Inside that room, the first cries of a newborn rang out clear, fragile, yet powerful enough to tear through the lingering shadows of the past. Alina lay back on the wooden bed, her face damp with sweat, eyes closed from exhaustion, but glowing with pure joy. Ethan knelt beside her, hands trembling as he received the tiny life from the midwife's arms. A baby boy with warm brown skin like his mother's and gray eyes exactly like his own. "Welcome to this world," Ethan whispered, tears running down cheeks weathered by years of wind and dust. Alina smiled faintly, gently brushing the baby's cheek. "What will we name him?" "Our son will not carry anyone's past," he said, eyes fixed on the child. "He will have a new name, like the beginning we chose." The days that followed passed in a kind of peace neither of them had ever known. Ethan rebuilt the fence, added a horse stall, and dug a new well near the house. Every afternoon, Alina sat on the porch, cradling her baby, singing lullabies in the Apache tongue, telling him stories about the sky, the wind, and the spirit of the land. From time to time, townsfolk passing by would slow down to look at the house, the same house where the woman who was hanged once lived. But no one said a word. Perhaps because that image was no longer a mark of shame or a curse, but a symbol of strength and courage. One evening, as a fiery sunset bathed the prairie in red, Ethan sat on the porch steps with the baby asleep in his arms and Alina resting her head on his shoulder. The wind gently tossed strands of her black hair across her face. "Did you ever think we would have this?" she asked softly. "Never," he replied, eyes gazing into the distance. Alina squeezed his hand, a quiet smile appearing. In that moment, there were no more curses, no more fear, no more mocking laughter. There was only a family, a man, a woman, and the child they had wrestled back from the grip of fate, back on the land where their past was once buried. A home had risen, not built from wood, nails, or stone, but from love, courage, and the choice to never turn back. And as night fell, the light from that little cabin still burned a flame that would never die out in the harsh heart of the West. Dear friend, love is not something born from the past. It is the choice to stay, even when the storm rages on. And when two souls once abandoned by the world still choose to hold each other's hands, that is the greatest victory over fate. In the end, I hope you find peace and happiness wherever life may take you. I love you all, the cherished audience of Wild West storytelling. Let me know how this story made you feel. Leave a comment down below. Type 1 if you love this story. And do not forget to subscribe to the channel for more gripping tales from the wild.